Just recently we've had a Waikato Times article by Matt Shand, which has provided some insights both from staff and from councillors at Tauranga City Council in relation to the operation of Garry Poole. Now, I just wanted to, in this video, give my 2 cents worth, just so that the general public, I guess, have an understanding of the context here. And for me, the context, which is really important, is that as a staff member at the time at Tauranga City Council, I reached the conclusion inside of 3 months, and after meeting with Garry Poole on 2 occasions, which totaled less than an hour, that he was going to go nowhere. He was going to be struggling to actually keep the council operating, let alone doing anything to improve these whole of Tauranga for the future. Now, we also have John Robson in his Mount Ratepayers speech talking about some of the fallacies of the previous CEO Garry Poole, and I'll just flick over to those now so that you can actually see what he said.
Remember, I said in 2016 in public, in writing, using my own money, there is a problem with building services. I also made the point that the chief executive should focus on that and not, as he was doing, hiring a design agency to change the logo of Tauranga City Council. Seriously. Where the money goes is obvious. You can look at it online. You can see the decisions being made. Back again last Tauranga, there was $1 million spent on a culture change program. Something like that, $1 million spent on a culture change program. Nuts. Complete utter waste of money. Marty Grenfell's, we've changed the culture with Marty Grenfell coming in. Get the right chief executive, things flow. Get the wrong chief executive.
Now, also feeding into this is the fact that for any new CEO coming into a council, they will typically meet with a number of external parties, and that of course occurred with Garry Poole. And in some cases I contacted some of the external parties he met with and spoke to the CEOs, and without giving them my opinion on Garry Poole, asked them what they thought from the meeting they had had from him. And the general consensus across the board was that he was somebody who you wouldn't hold too many aspirations in terms of taking things into the future. And as somebody said in one of those conversations, he would be one of the bluntest knives in the drawer. So for me to have reached that conclusion with an extremely high level of certainty after less than 3 months of him starting, really I think puts the situation we're now in with the 2013 elected councillors and the 2016 elected councillors in the limelight. What we have is a CEO who has actually done his whole 5-year contract, and when we look at the Waikato Times article, which I'll get to in a minute, I believe it would have been completely apparent to any of the councillors in any of those time frames that the situation with Poole wasn't going to be good, and they would have been able to reach that conclusion, in my opinion, in less than 3 months, because they have daily dealings with him. So for that to have come to pass, in my view, the councillors have really let this community down. And not only have they let this community down, but based on what I said in my earlier video, which I'll link to in this video in the comments, we actually also have a situation that the staff morale and situation with staff competency has also gone backwards in a serious way. This council is now, in my opinion, in dire straits, and you can see in council meetings the sort of general quality of the information that is coming through, and some of the poor decision making that is occurring on lack of information and various assumptions which really are extremely poor assumptions. So I'll now flick over to the Waikato Times article and we'll have a bit of a look at that. Now what I have here is the article from the Waikato Times in relation to the Chief Executive's Garry Poole's computer literacy. In reality, this actually covers a lot more feedback than just his computer literacy, but you'll see here mention is made that he struggled to use the email and relied on his assistants to make phone calls and assist him in many ways because of, in the view of the article, his incompetency in these areas, and went through 8 executive assistants in 5 years. Now this information was fully known to me in terms of what I had heard from staff at the council, and it is obvious, as you will come down, that also councillors were fully aware of this. And even though they were aware of this, and I believe they would have been aware of this at an early age in Garry Poole's tenure, still they did nothing. You'll see here that Calvin Clout is stating that the actual executive assistants are actually doing the writing, sending of emails. So in other words, it's fair to say that Garry Poole had removed himself as much as is possible from actually doing any work. And Councillor Leanne Brown said that the executive assistants were performing tasks outside of their job description, which resulted in the team burning out and leaving. And we also have a situation where one only lasted 2 weeks. We also have the mention here about Garry Poole and the malfeasance in public office situation, which then ultimately resulted in the low integrity solution where one building inspector did all of the inspections for Bella Vista Homes. And also here we've got the repeated scrutiny about various projects which have failed and millions have been wasted. And we now have a Phoenix car park which was supposed to be in green space, and it's nothing more than a pseudo skate park according to this writer of this article, Matt Shand. And we also have here 5.7 million that's been spent on the heart of the project scheme, which really hasn't resulted in anything much happening, and $500,000 was spent on consultants, lawyers and office furniture. The Marine Precinct has come into the spotlight as well, and here we have the Mayor Greg Brownless saying that change is needed, but yet he was one of the people who allowed Garry Poole, along with the other councillors mentioned in this article and the ones who aren't mentioned, who obviously are wanting to remain fairly quiet, and in all cases let him run for the full 5-year tenure before doing anything. And down here we have Garry Poole, who was contacted basically saying, "Hi, run your story, I'll consider my options." So far I've seen nothing negative in the newspapers, and this article hasn't been pulled, so one suspects that Garry Poole has possibly checked his options and found out that in fact there's nothing you can do when you're confronted with the truth. Now when you look at this in yet another light, and what I'm looking at here is who could have actually done something about the situation with Garry Poole, the only entity that can do anything is the councillors. The staff all sit underneath him, and so the councillors are the ones who are tasked with controlling the CEO, directing him and deciding whether he stays on, and they have failed in this situation gravely. We also have a situation where if you look at the total dollars that we pay for councillors to carry out this function, you essentially have most of them earning around about $76,000, and I think the mayor earns around about 120, 130, and the deputy mayor probably about 100. And then when you factor in democracy services, you're not going to see much change out of probably 1 to 1.1 million, and that is per annum that we pay these people. So over the time frame that we've actually had this situation unfolding, not only has Garry Poole been collecting around about $370,000 a year, so about 1.6 million over that 5-year time frame, but councillors have effectively churned through another 5.5 million in poor governance in relation to the CEO. So I think that puts things in a very good light in terms of what the reality is at Tauranga City Council, and I don't think it could be any sadder than what it is at the moment.
The council's got a different approach, but we have in Tauranga a number of councillors, and we used to have a chief executive who genuinely had these aspirations that they would make. I think the official line was Tauranga would become an internationally competitive city. Really, 135,000 people in a small regional centre, separated from wealth by the kaimais and everything else, was going to compete with. I mean, this is nuts. But the money that was spent on these things, and that's where your rates rises are coming from, and we've got to stop it.